Hello and welcome to Mindset Kitchen. My name is Diana Paleokaite and I have an amazing guest with me here today. His name is David Robson. He's a science writer and an author of 3 amazing books. I say amazing, I haven't read them all. I've only started reading one of the last books that he's written. But the reason I say amazing because his mindset, his research, all these years of studying has produced some wonderful results. And I really cannot wait to have a go at your mindset messages. So welcome, David.
Thanks so much for having me. I've been really excited about this.
Likewise, such a pleasure. So David, I know I just said science writer and an author, but tell me a little bit more.
Sure. So I started being a science writer straight out of university in 2006, and I've worked for New Scientist and the BBC, and then I started writing my books. And essentially, what I've always been fascinated by is the human mind and how we can live a good life, and how we can improve our mental health, how we can achieve our goals. And for me, it's really important that anything that I apply in my own life or any advice that I give other people is based on really sound research. So that's why it's all very thoroughly scientifically researched, what I look at in peer-reviewed articles. And then I try to distill those messages and make them as easy to apply as possible.
David, seriously, you're right up my street, if I may say that. Because I just wanted to quickly introduce The Laws of Connection. This is the book that is being launched in June. So if you watch David on LinkedIn, for example, and if you're not, I actually suggest you to buy all of the books because this is on my next list to read, because I'm going to get the other 2 books, which we can mention which name and you can introduce them as well. But this is the book that I've got my hands on, and it's just a proof, but I can approve it already. And the beginning of the book really it goes in and shows me the amount of work you have to do to even address all these really, really small but so fundamental aspects of humanity and human mind and how we interact with people. And I'm so fascinated. And one of David's messages today is actually from this book, and I'm really looking forward to understanding a bit more. I ask my guests usually to give me an ingredient or a dish or something they love eating or maybe a cuisine. But David didn't give me any of those.
No, I like to be surprised. Yeah.
And I think we will start talking about a little bit about that as well within your message. So David wanted to have this expectation effect. And that in turn put a little bit of pressure on me, but I am one of those people who absolutely love pressure. So I went completely different way where I've just started to think of a meal that I've never made before. It involves a bit of technique, and it could go all wrong as well. So the guests, the audience who watch me, they know I usually take quite a few risks here with the food. So I warn you now. I warn you, David. So what I'm cooking for you today is salmon, yes, but I'm also got here potatoes. So these are raw grated potatoes.
Yeah.
I squeeze the water out of them. And I know you're not a cook or anything, so you're probably going to be like telling your partner maybe, oh yeah, she's done this. Can you make that for me? Hopefully, fingers crossed. But this is all potatoes. And what I'm going to do is wrap the salmon within the potatoes. I will start this process as soon as I read your first message, and then I'll leave it to sit a little bit. And then I'm going to prepare you a lovely white sauce and then a few little decorations and asparagus. So essentially it's potatoes and salmon, but the way it's done, it's kind of like almost like a beef Wellington, if you know what I mean, but just different type. And I only seen a little snippet, maybe 30 seconds video of someone making this, and it was in different language and there was no recipe provided, so I had to improvise. And I think I succeeded, because some people who tasted it approved it, but fingers crossed I will succeed right now as well.
I have 100% faith.
Thank you.
I can tell you're an intuitive cook, which is always the best.
Exactly. I think I am. I just feel cooking is almost like music. I cook, I try, and all my life I actually never liked reading recipes. I have this thing about reading recipes. I cannot focus for too long. I read a recipe and I'm like, oh, it's just so many ingredients, and then it puts me off. But actually, if I look at the picture, oh, I can see this is quite simple. So then I make it up myself.
Yeah, I think recipes can be a bit too constricting
Yeah,
often. Yeah.
exactly. Okay, so before I kick off, I'll read your first message. The ways that we frame an experience can shape our body's physical reactions. We can see these expectation effects in our responses to medicine, food, exercise. Tell me more about it.
Okay, so that comes from my second book, which is called The Expectation Effect. And that really looks at the way that we create self-fulfilling prophecies through three main mechanisms, which is changes to our physiology, our perception, and our behaviour. And it actually applies in all kinds of different areas of life. But the most famous, I guess, is the placebo effect in medicine. So I think a lot of us know that often people will experience pain relief, for example, when they take a dummy pill that's just made of sugar with no active ingredient, but they believe that they're taking a real analgesic drug. Now, in the past, like 100 years ago, people kind of assumed that was kind of a bit of a hoax. It's kind of the patients might think they're feeling better, but nothing's really happening in the body that would suggest that there's any objective reality to that. But the research over the last, I guess, 50 years on the placebo effect has shown that actually there are real physiological changes happening. And so when you take a painkiller, for example, the brain acts as its own kind of inner pharmacy, and it can produce its own pain-killing drugs like opioids or endocannabinoids that can help to reduce your suffering. And we can test that in really quite sophisticated ways. So you can give someone alongside their placebo another drug that is going to block the effects of the opioids, for example. So it actually stops them connecting to the receptor in your brain. And what you find is that that actually reduces the size of the placebo effect significantly. So that really shows there's this biological mechanism. So that's been researched for, quite a while now, but it's only really within the last 10 years that scientists have started to wonder, well, if we're experiencing placebo effects in hospitals and doctors' surgeries, maybe it's also having an effect in other areas of our life. So things like exercise or diet. And that's exactly what they're now beginning to discover. So when you go to the gym and you're working out, the benefits that will bring to your body and the performance in the moment both depend on your expectations and your beliefs about your physical ability. And similarly with the food that we eat, our beliefs about what we're eating can change everything from how satisfying we find it, how our body responds hormonally to that food. So whether you release these hormones that will kind of make you feel satisfied or make you feel hungry later on can depend just purely on your expectations. And even your absorption of nutrients can depend on your beliefs about the food. So if you really have that high sense of anticipation, you're more likely to digest the food in a way that releases the vitamins and minerals for your body to make use of.
Wow, okay. So there's lots of things coming up to me because I am quite familiar with the placebo effect as well, because it's one of my favorite things to read about. And I've been reading Joy Dispenza, You Are the Placebo. And that's when I got so familiar with it and started looking into it a bit more deeper, because it's fascinating, because people can take a pill and think this is going to make them better, and it does make you better, although it was just a placebo pill. I'm still surprised that we're not using this much more into NHS practice. Someone comes in and says, there you go, you will feel better. But we don't, because we don't want to take a risk, because obviously the person involved might actually not get better. But if we really all believed in that, like the universal belief, imagine we were actually born with that ability to heal ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the scientific research kind of suggests that the placebo effect is definitely much more effective for some illnesses than others. So generally those that involve, say, pain, inflammation, digestion, blood pressure, all of those. But yeah, I think the big barrier to using the placebo effect in medicine had always been the fact that it seemed you needed kind of some kind of deception, which is unethical for a doctor to give
Exactly.
you one thing but pretend it's another. But what's so exciting is that actually the recent research shows you don't need to have deception to benefit from the placebo effect. So,
Ah.
like with painkillers, you can actually give people a placebo, tell them that it's a placebo, but then explain why that might still be beneficial. So, you tell them about the power of the mind body connection, you explain to them how expectation effects work, but you still tell them, even though it's a dummy pill, still take it twice a day. Like the ritual is important. And then what you find is that people with chronic pain, who've had really bad back pain maybe for years, once they start taking the placebos, they actually start to feel a big, clinically significant reduction in their symptoms. And that's so important, I think, when we're really worried about like the opioid crisis and people becoming addicted to these painkillers. You can actually empower people by explaining the science of the expectation effect. You can empower them to be better at managing their own pain. So that's an area of a lot of excitement for neuroscientists at the moment.
Wow, absolutely fascinating. And David, you were saying you would like to have expectation effect. And you know what? I'm hopeful that with that, because you are trying to, not trying, you're probably living that and living to experience that, because we all able to experience that. So I'm hopeful this will be easy to adjust and you'll be flying home. But I would like to, do you know, or have you researched or heard, is it going to come sooner? Because I actually want to go to the store and buy a placebo pill. I actually would like to see as an
Yeah.
experiment run how many people will pick that over an actual paracetamol.
Yeah, that would be really interesting to do that study if you kind of explained the benefits of the expectation effect. And then you said, like, here's your choice, take a placebo or take the actual pill. I mean, anecdotally, some doctors have told me that they have had patients asking for placebos once they've found out
Oh,
about this research. So yeah, definitely there's an interest there. You can buy placebos online on sites like Amazon, actually. So you can do that if you want. And I know some of my friends have done that. They've bought this um, like jar of sugar pills, and when they have a
wow.
headache, they'll take one of those and just kind of remind themselves of the brain's ability to kind of heal its own pain when they have a headache, for example. And they've said that that's effective. But yeah, I think now there are trials looking, in hospitals with people who've undergone like severe burns, for example, to wean them off their painkillers onto placebos so that when they go home, their rehabilitation is a lot easier. And I'm seeing a lot more interest in this all the time.
So I think there are a couple of things. One is being aware what placebo effect and what it does, and using that awareness to actually take placebo tablet. And another one is not telling you what it is and just swapping the pills and giving you the pill, which will it makes you think that you are still on that pill and it heals you. So there are two types of people who are actually able to take placebo effect
Yeah.
and believe that, but there are people who you will say it's a placebo and they will actually say, well, it's not going to help me, and be really critical and negative about it.
Yeah.
So it's almost like I can see why it's not here right now, because it's education, it's mindset, beliefs, and everything else need to come into place.
Yeah, that's it. I do think if you're given, they call them open label placebos, so when you know what you're taking. I do think if you give that to someone who has a really negative mindset towards the whole thing, just won't accept that that the mind body connection exists, then I think they're less likely to get relief. Um, but there is another way of harnessing these effects, and that is just through psychological therapy. So you don't actually use the kind of crutch of the tool of the placebo pill itself, but you just talk to the patients and help to reassure them about their fears and explain to them better kind of why the actual medicine that they're taking is going to be effective. And then what you see is that actually that can boost the benefits that they get. So there was a study of people with really bad anemia who needed an iron transfusion. And rather than giving them a placebo, they did give them the real iron transfusion. But the doctors took about 15 minutes to explain to them, why it was going to be beneficial, what was going to happen to their body, how long the effects would last for. So just kind of enhancing their expectations, but in a way that is totally honest. There's no deception there. And they found that actually for those patients, they benefited a lot more. They felt their energy levels were rising a lot more than the people who just had the iron infusion without that extra information. Yeah.
So I know through your research and science, you identify quite a few areas, and it's almost like one approach doesn't fit all. It's the same with drugs. You can't give one drug and expect everyone will benefit from that drug. So it's so individual. I must say it's individual, because I don't know how will I react if someone is giving me a placebo tablet or telling me something versus I don't know. In my world and the people that I met before, with a certain mindsets, it's already you creating a placebo with a mindset. Because if something is, let's say something is happening or about to happen, but it hasn't happened, you could easily draw yourself into as if it's happened, and your body is producing that energy, that chemistry, it's happening, and your body's feeling as if it already happened. But nothing actually happened yet, but your body thinks it did. So is your mind creating that false kind of expectation or false effect? And many times when something stressful happens, let's say to me, and I think about it and like, well, it hasn't happened. It's just, it could, but it hasn't. So I try to switch my mind really quickly, and I start thinking really positive things. And that's my placebo, kind of my brain placebo. Yeah. What do you say about that, where you using your mind purely as a placebo?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's one of the most effective ways of applying this research on the expectation effect. So psychologists talk about that kind of negative spiral of thinking that you can have, where you're always imagining the worst case scenario, and then you're thinking about the consequences of, if that worst case scenario happens. Like, you're kind of always looking for the kind of next step in this constant spiral. They call that catastrophizing. And so you can see it in pain. If you start having a headache and you immediately jump to the conclusion that you have a brain tumor, well, what the research shows is that that kind of anxiety actually causes the brain to release this chemical called CCK, which amplifies pain signals. Wow. So it's actually physiologically ensuring that those pain signals cause you more suffering. And in evolution, a chemical like CCK was useful if you were in danger of being injured and then you were injured. It made sure you noticed that injury straight away so you could get to safety. But obviously, if we're worried, we're safe in our homes, and then we're kind of irrationally worried about an illness, then that can actually backfire really badly and enhance our suffering. Like you said, it's also really relevant with stress. If you're public speaking, for example, and first of all, you start worrying about, maybe your heart's racing a bit and you start to worry that you're going to faint or have a panic attack. Well, then that is another level of anxiety that you're adding to the immediate anxiety about the challenge itself. And, that catastrophizing then is just making it more likely that then you're going to the fight or flight response, which will then potentially cause, what you fear to happen to become true. So it makes it more likely you will actually have that panic attack. And so a lot of the psychological therapies around the expectation effect look at intervening in that process and helping people to prevent the catastrophization happening before, say, you go on stage or face that big job interview or take that exam.
It's so fascinating, David, because I could talk about this forever. Seriously, I'm obsessed about this. And I'm having so many books and I want to read and understand. And there's so many things coming through to me, because I feel like I'm going to have to keep you here an entire day chatting to you about this. Because actually, you just reminded me something. I used to have panic attacks. And I realized they were actually just your own invention.
Right.
But when I never used to experience them, only saw some other people experiencing them, you think, oh my God, that's a little bit crazy. That's over the top. Then it happened to me, and I was like, wow, it's scary, as if someone's holding a gun to your head, and this is how scary it is. But it happened to me 3 times. On the 3rd time, I thought, no, I'm going to catch you, hold you there, and you're going to go away, because this is not happening. So with my mind, I was able to switch them off completely, and they never came back. That was through my law studies, when I used to study late hours and drinking Red Bull to stay awake. And suddenly my heart started beating, and I was just start experiencing some sort of anxiety mixed with heartbeat. And it risen to the point that I'm actually having a panic attack. So now I know what it is, but it came from me, so it needs to stop within me.
Yeah.
And I stopped it. And then I realized, at that time, I think I realized a bit more the power of the mind, but I never looked at it much deeper. But the power of the mind basically can heal you or kill you.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, yeah, I had a similar experience, which was the inspiration for the book, The Expectation Effect. And that was when I was going through like a tough period in my life, and I started taking antidepressant pills. And my doctor warned me that those pills could, result in migraines, which, like, your GP is obliged to tell you about the potential side effects. And then I did start having really bad headaches straight away. But I was writing a piece for the BBC about the placebo effect at the time. And one of the outcomes of that piece was that actually a lot of the side effects that we think we're getting from the drug itself are often caused by the expectations. So the warning for many people is actually creating the side effect that they don't want to have. So I looked into it, and actually with the pills I was taking, it was very unlikely that it was my headaches were down to the chemical effects itself. It was much more likely it was an expectation effect.
Wow.
And that realization actually just opening my mind to the possibility that the headaches weren't something going wrong with my brain chemistry, and it was actually just coming from within. It was so powerful at relieving that pain. Like, it basically disappeared within a couple of hours of having discovered that. And so, yeah, that made me think, like you were saying with your panic attacks, it makes you realize, actually, when you've lived that for yourself, it makes you realize just how important mindset can be. And then I started wondering, well, like, what else is it doing in my life, and how can we harness this to make better use of the expectation effect?
Absolutely fascinating. I'm having goosebumps here as I'm standing. As you talk, I'm having loads of scenarios, like a download in my head. And when my son is running and say, "Don't run so fast, you will fall," and he thinks, "Oh yes, I probably will fall," and then he does fall. And it's fascinating. And that's where you just mentioned the last sentence. When we think our mindset is important to be successful, to have an amazing career, or to make money, but actually our mindset is so important to our well-being and to our survival in the best form we are here to survive, because we could be such a healthy humans, but we actually, with our minds, we're really sabotaging so much of that experience on earth.
Yeah, and I do see it as kind of self-sabotage.
Yeah.
So say, like, when you're looking at something like fitness, there was a lovely study where they got students into the lab, and they were going to do this endurance test. But first of all, they took a genetic test that looked at one particular gene, CREB1, which is involved in kind of physiological stamina. Now, the test was real, but they kind of gave sham feedback to the students. So some people who had the good gene were told they had the bad gene, and vice versa. Now, what turned out was that, those expectations, those false expectations, powerfully influenced how well these students did when they got on the treadmill. And what was even more, so it wasn't just their total kind of endurance and stamina. What was even more shocking was that it actually changed, like, their physiological reaction to the exercise. Things like how efficiently their lungs were exchanging carbon dioxide for oxygen. Wow. And in some cases, like in that one, the expectations were more powerful than the gene itself. So what version of your gene was less important than whether you believed you had the good one or the bad one. And so if you go through life thinking, I'm not a sporty person, like, I'm never going to enjoy exercise, you're sabotaging like all of your workouts, and you're just making it so much harder for yourself. And when we just shift our mindsets, it's almost like taking the brakes off of our potential, so we can progress a lot more quickly.
Absolutely. And David, if someone thought, actually, I grew up someone telling me you were just really bad at math, and I was quite bad, but there was I swapped teachers at a very early age, and I went to the class which were a bit, how do I say, I don't know how do you say it in English, but basically a class was where basics were explained to you in more depth so you could understand better rather than high level. And when I went to that class, I became a best in there, but because the teacher said to me, you are amazing, you're doing really well. So suddenly I actually became really good at math. And the other teacher, who I've left now because I went away from my class, she said, do you want to come back? And I thought, well, I think you sabotaged me in the first place by saying I'm not good at math. Then I believed that.
Yeah.
And then naturally, my results in math were not good at first.
Yeah. I mean, we see the effects of expectations a lot in academia, but yeah, especially something like maths. I think the anxiety that you can feel kind of clouds your mental workspace. So it's such a distraction that it just stops you thinking clearly about the problems at hand. And we see the same with creativity. Lots of people could be far more creative, but they have this kind of anxiety about original thinking. And that's, it stops them then from experimenting and trying new things. And, every kind of creative act has to involve some kind of failure. But if we always fear that, then, we're never going to reach our potential in those fields either.
Exactly that, David. Seriously, I must move on now. I must move on to another message because I could talk about this forever, and I knew I'm like overrunning already. Let's crack on. So our second message. Oh, by the way, what I've done here, I just popped this in the pan, and I'm going to lightly fry it at just kind of medium temperature to start cooking it all. So the process will be a bit slower, but it will all be nicely cooked through.
Excellent.
So I will pop a lid as well to just avoid a bit of noise. Anyway, so the second message. Oh, so exciting, David, so exciting. Our thoughts about aging can influence our longevity through changes to our behavior and our physical stress response. So you wrote, people with positive views of old age live 7 years longer on average.
Yeah, I mean, so this was one of the expectation effects that I went into it with like a lot of skepticism and came out the other side being very convinced that this is real. So that statistic, this 7-year difference in longevity, came from a study in 2002. And like by itself, I wouldn't have necessarily put too much weight on it, but it's been replicated just so many times in so many different labs that I think you have to start to believe that it is true. And it's true when you look at lots of different measures of kind of aging and health as we get older. So the risk of Alzheimer's, for example, is about twice as big for people with a negative view of aging compared to those with a positive view of aging. And you can see those differences in the brain's structure and physiology. So you can actually see that people with the negative view of aging are more likely to develop those amyloid plaques that are thought to be implicated in Alzheimer's. And so you wonder, well, like, how could that be? But actually, there's lots of different mechanisms that are equally important. So one is if you're kind of optimistic about living a long and healthy life, you're probably more likely to kind of look after yourself, to eat healthily, to exercise, because you're just a bit more optimistic that it's actually worth preserving your health. And that's definitely important. But also, I think it really comes into play when you look at the sense of vulnerability that you might get as you age. If you assume that aging is just inevitably associated with disease and a kind of physical decline, disability, forgetfulness, dementia, if that's all you're focusing on, you start to see all kinds of everyday activities as being a lot more kind of threatening and dangerous. So going to the shops, you're worried you'll get lost or that you'll have a fall. Meeting new friends, you're worried that you'll embarrass yourself by forgetting their names. And that raises your stress levels. And you can see this in longitudinal studies that basically every year after retirement for people with the negative views of aging, their levels of cortisol increase a bit. And we know that long-term chronic stress of that kind, when it's day after day after day, when it's unrelenting, that can wreak havoc on the body. So for one thing, it increases inflammation, which we know can be useful in the short term, but in the long term, it can damage tissues. And then we can even see those effects in the cells themselves. So as we get older, we all have these characteristic changes in our gene expression that accompany aging. And what you see is that the people with the negative views of aging have, they show that change in gene expression a lot more quickly. So it's like their biological clock is just ticking at a quicker rate, which means that then, they're going to be predisposed to the kind of the illnesses associated with aging much more quickly at a younger age compared to someone who's got that positive view of aging, who thinks of aging as being a time of wisdom and growth, and recognizes that actually some of their, their knowledge, they've got a whole lifetime of knowledge behind them that can be useful for dealing with the challenges that they face. They don't have that stress, they don't have the accompanying inflammation, and so their bodies stay healthier for longer.
So David, if we apply this every day, me and you at 120 years old will be like, right, yeah, exactly. Hi David, I'm not dying, I'm happy. It's just my body not listening to me, but yeah. You know what?
Well, yeah, exactly. And so I think obviously you are going to have some age related changes to your physical health, but I guess like it's a nuanced approach that we need to recognize that, you're also gaining some skills as well as losing some skills.
David, it's absolutely fascinating because I see that as you brought a little bit of different angle to say, thinking about the old age. I was just, in general, my view was the more positive outlook on life, the more positive you are, and the less serious about everything you are, the longer you're going to live.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's lots of books and lots of research proven that your positivity really gives you vitality in a sense.
Yeah.
And in the first place, people say, well, it's really hard to be always positive. Yeah. And I could agree with them, but then positivity and accepting that old age is actually the most beautiful thing. And it almost gives you that awareness. Let's say I am being negative. Oh, no. You want to live an extra year or longer? Yeah. Just let's stay positive. So I have that awareness to keep bringing myself back. But I was just saying that I know, I don't look it, but I am 40 next year, which sounds crazy. And I was saying to my partner, I am 40 next year. And I'm like, actually, it's amazing to be 40 because it's such a beautiful age. I am confident. I have wisdom, as you said. I have traveled the world. I've got my son. It's the most fascinating time to live. And I think when I was younger and I used to look at 30 or 40-year-olds, I thought they're so old. Yeah. But now I think this is the prime life. And when I'm 60, I'm going to think, wow, I am in such a perfect place in my life because my child is grown up. I have this freedom. It's almost like I have another 60 years in me. If I keep on thinking that, I might well, but it's just having the positivity around you aging. Yeah, it's so important.
It is, and I think like what the research had shown is that we have a lot of kind of negative stereotypes associated with aging. In our culture, it's a very ageist culture, which we kind of can absorb from a young age. Like even little kids at primary school start having these views of older people that are, kind of that it might be a joke rather than being, a kind of fountain of knowledge. And we internalize that, and then you can it seems you reach a kind of milestone age, like, 60, and then you really start to think, well, my life is kind of over. I must be at the point where I'm going to be vulnerable. And that's really when the damage starts to accumulate, like when the stress kicks in. But like you say, we can reframe kind of where we are at each stage of our life and recognize that there are advantages and there might be disadvantages, but you can still make the most of what you have. And when I was researching the book, like I interviewed Paddy Jones, who is this amazing acrobatic salsa dancer. And she's now in her 80s, and she only started doing this like very energetic form of dancing when she was about 62, I believe. So, and you look at her, and she's just gone from like strength to strength. And she's performed. She was on Britain's Got Talent. Then she performed on the equivalent show in Argentina, in Germany. Wow. She was at the San Remo Music Festival. It's like she has had a whole new lease of life. And
Wow.
that's who I aspire to be like, basically.
That's fascinating. I always, when you watch people at 80 years old and moving so flexibly and freely
Yeah.
and full of energy, you think, well, they're unique, one of a kind. Well, it happened to you. But I think a lot to do is with the mindset of your
Yeah.
aging. And people really don't think about that when they see a person like that.
No, we assume it's just good luck. We don't think that actually also, she's training hard with her dancing as well. Like, and also I think that's one of the problems is that when we get to be older, we're so defeatist. We're like, oh, I might like to dance, but I'm probably not going to be able to, or it might be dangerous for me to start exercising. And that used to be the medical advice. It was like, don't start exercising when you're 60.
Exactly.
But actually, the benefits are so much greater than the risks that basically any age you're at, you should try to do more physical activity than you currently do.
It's so fascinating, David. And I wonder where this comes from, I guess, from many hundreds of years of how we're living to give advice to stop exercising. I guess if you come really not fit, you can say, well, start walking. From walking, you can start running and so on. And it's just that belief. And I hope with your research and other people who into this area research, we will bring the old age to be the best age, the age where you flourish, the age where you know what to do.
Yeah, I really hope so. And I think like we look at advances in medicine, um, you know, things have improved so much even since my grandparents were alive for like dealing with illnesses like cancer and heart disease and just our general lifestyles. Even though there's some problems with the modern lifestyle, like people are healthier than they have been at any time in history. So there's a lot of reason for us to be optimistic about our old age.
I am so optimistic about my age because if I have people in my kitchen like you more and more often, when I come to be 80, I'll be like, shall we go to Ibiza, to a Ibiza summer closing party? And obviously people will laugh, but that's another issue, not issue or per se notice, as you just said, what we think about older people. And for older people, how they reflect to our thoughts and our behaviors towards them. So if older people did not pay attention, let's say, you think I'm old, blah, 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 but I am actually in my prime right now. I'm actually feeling better than you are feeling, and I'm in a better position than you are. And actually we're like that towards the younger people. Because I did think all the people that said you open the door to them, you treat them as they are almost to die, or unable to do certain things. And perhaps at that time, yes, they are, because they're struggling to walk. But if the younger kids, younger children and older people attitudes change towards the old age in the first place, mutually could really benefit from that.
Yeah, I really hope we will see that societal change because actually the kind of age stereotypes we have at the moment are kind of some of the lingering prejudices, one of the only lingering prejudices where we don't really call people out for it. It's still acceptable to buy a greetings card that's kind of joking about an older person's memory or talking about them being over the hill or whatever. And okay, it's kind of a joke, and I think lots of people take it in that way, but it's reinforcing this idea that aging is something to dread and that you're kind of on the decline. And I think we need to move away from that now.
So, David, have you done any research into Japanese and why they live so beautifully and they are full of energy and still working by the time they're 80 or 90? Is that mainly to do with their mindset and their diet or anything else?
Yes, I think there are probably lots of different factors. So I do think their kind of general lifestyle and diet has been very important. It might be changing now maybe if they are eating more kind of Western style fast food, but I think, the traditional Japanese diet was very healthy. But yeah, also I think there are cultural differences with the way that countries like Japan perceive old age. And so older people generally have more respect there. And that's having that respect from younger generations is then really important for allowing them to keep that mindset that allows them to kind of age more healthily. And we see that in some kind of isolated areas of Europe. So in Sardinia, there's the kind of blue zone where you have a
Yes.
high number of centenarians. And actually, so I visited there for a film I did for the BBC 5 years ago. And it was really incredible to see how these, older people were revered. And they were still very active in their community, very well respected. Their opinions and their advice was very much required. And so I think that was helping them to kind of have that mindset and to relish their old age rather than maybe feel ashamed of it.
I think, in all honesty, I think older people should be at schools, educating us with more like how to live life without not to how to live life. Let's say I've survived the disease or survived. How to live life with a really healthy and positive mindset.
Yeah.
Because there are so many people who are 95, 100 and they were smoking and drinking and do all of those things, but there was something with their mindset that made them so invincible.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we want to live like as healthy a lifestyle as we can, but also like what we don't want is like the anxiety to become so overpowering. And so there's this interesting phenomenon called the French paradox, which is that French people have tended to kind of have more saturated fat than, say, we eat in the UK or the USA, but they also have a better record of cardiovascular health than the US or the UK. And so one theory is that actually it's because of the attitudes to food.
Oh, wow.
And so if you look at there's lots of questionnaires, lots of ways to test this, but if you look at their association, say, with cake, in the US, people are more likely to associate cake with guilt. In France, they're more likely to associate it with celebration.
True.
And one idea is that actually, if you're constantly feeling a lot of anxiety about what you're eating, then that's going to be worse for your health in the long run.
So this, as you can see, I'm frying this in oil, and it wouldn't be like, everyday weekly dinner.
Yeah.
But you're not thinking this is bad for you. You're thinking this is going to be a delightful experience. And I'll just put that into your head. I don't know if you're thinking that.
Yeah.
But that's what happens when I go to restaurants. I don't have any rules, although I like to keep my physique, but I don't go to the restaurant thinking this is bad, this is bad. I go to restaurant and just order anything I want. And that's been all my life. I eat anything I want because it's a celebration, it's enjoyment, it's the experience. And I don't want to restrict myself and have a salad or asparagus for starter,
No, exactly. And I think also, so when you look at cultural differences across Europe, I think people in the UK are really bad for assuming that so-called healthy foods are inherently unsatisfying and not so tasty. And what we need more is to also recognise that, we can have our treats and our cakes and we don't have to feel guilty about that. But also something delicious like salmon and asparagus, is also incredibly satisfying and enriching. And that will then help us to it helps to keep your hunger levels lower later on if you have the expectation of being satisfied by what you're eating.
So what you just said to us, David, if we all go about our lives and apply that, cake is not guilt anymore. It's true, but obviously you can't have cake every single day.
No.
Maybe you can, I don't know. But when you have a cake, have it with such a pleasure and mindfulness. I do think about mindfulness a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Let's say when we have alcohol, when we eat certain foods that may be fried or, not extremely healthy, I enjoy them so much because I savor. And I'm almost like having this dance in my mind because it's so delicious.
Yeah.
And I really don't want to feel guilty about it because I made the choice to eat it. So why to really sabotage yourself by feeling guilty about it?
Well, yeah, and that's what the research shows actually, is that when people really savour foods like a piece of chocolate cake, for example, they're actually more likely to choose a smaller portion because you realise if you're really thinking about the pleasure you're going to get from that, you realise you don't need a great big chunk. You can get the same pleasure from a smaller amount. And when you stop feeling guilty, you're less likely to. I think guilt causes this thing called the "what the hell" effect, where you're like, oh, I've eaten one piece of cake, so I might as well like finish it off, like have the whole lot, because you're like, well, I've already failed my diet or whatever, so I'm an awful person. I'm just going to indulge now.
Wow.
But actually, if you see it as a celebration, you recognise it's important for your mental health to have that pleasure. You can have your piece of cake and then you're like, fine, I had that pleasure, now I'm going to stick to my diet again. Maybe in a week's time I'll have another piece of cake and I'll enjoy it. But that doesn't mean my diet was kind of all for nothing.
Absolutely fascinating, David. I really hope that people who are watching will take that away, because even though I'm quite aware of the food and what I eat, I do sometimes feel a little guilt if I go 2 or 3 days with some sort of takeaway or I'm out all the time. You find yourself being guilty, but many times because I have this awareness of my feelings, my emotions, and what I think, it's so important to me not to affect myself negatively. I always say, well, this was lovely, so now I'm going to be 4 days feeling really clean and healthy, and I kind of like assist that to balance it all out, because for me it's all about balance.
Yeah.
And I hope if people do have takeaway Indian curry, don't feel guilty about it. Just have a blast, enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You ordered it,
Yeah.
have it, and then because the guilt. It's in a sense is a negative emotion, or you don't have to even give a name to it, but it causes the negative chemistry in your body.
Yeah.
And it naturally spirals to that. So every time you have the curry now, you will feel guilt.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't have to be so defeatist, Like, we should see any of our kind of goals as being like a journey, and a little detour is not something to be ashamed of. Having a pleasant diversion of like a takeaway, if you're on a diet, is like, does not mean that you haven't made loads of progress already and that you can't make the progress in the future. So a big part of my message from the expectation effect is really just treat ourselves with more self-compassion. Just recognize that, like, if we slip up or, deviate from our goals, that's not something that we have to beat ourselves up about. The research is really clear on this. Actually, the more self-critical we are, the worse we are at keeping our goals, because it creates so much more stress that is like inherently impairing for kind of reaching our ambitions. And so actually just like being kind to yourself, learning from a mistake if you've made one, but not kind of seeing that as something that's inherently, innately wrong with you. That's the attitude that we should be having.
Absolutely amazing. I think people watching today probably will want a little piece of you, David, in their lives, because that's what I'm feeling.
Oh, thank you. My books and my writing.
The book, and I'm going to get expectation effect as well, because it's something I always think about, and I almost live it already. So it will be really good to actually have words written and almost a meaning to all of it.
Yeah, I think that's it. Some people may not practice the expectation effect at all, and they can learn a lot. But I think even people who do have a positive mindset, it can help to explain to them kind of what they've been doing intuitively. And, that can also be useful to kind of just have the kind of scientific proof in front of you that, like, you're on the right path.
It's exactly that. It's giving a name to it, because I never knew I knew the expectation and I knew the effect, but the expectation effect as such thing, it wasn't in my vocabulary. So now it will be. Yeah. I promise it will be everywhere I go. It will be the expectation effect.
That's what I think is so useful, is to have these concepts and to be able to put a label to something can actually help us to then apply it more in our lives, or apply it more effectively in our lives. It's like creating a mental toolkit that you can use. So that's what I'm really hoping with my books, is that like it gives people all of these different strategies that they can then apply.
Exactly that, David. It's so fascinating. So far, I'm having so much fun. The food is here. I'm about to cut it and serve you, but I know we have a third message to go through as well. David, seriously, we're going to run out of time completely here. It's going to be 3 hours later and we're still discussing. And with all your research, your experience, and I know you are yourself living example of some of the tests and research that you've done, because in your book you mentioned that you were quite shy and you did not like social interactions beforehand, and you were applying, almost experimenting yourself, and from your own experience these ideas arose for you to actually talk about them and research them.
Yeah. So like when I was a kid, I had like really quite bad social anxiety and shyness. So I had like a kind of core group of friends, but meeting strangers, kind of getting to know new people, I found very stressful. And like when I became a journalist, like I just had to overcome that. Like I couldn't be interviewing kind of scientists like every day if I still felt that kind of social anxiety. And what I found actually was that it did diminish over time. It's like I kind of proved to myself, meeting all of these scientists, that in general people were a lot kinder, more generous than I'd ever expected. And then it was about 5 years ago I started looking into some scientific research on this, and I found there's a load of like really good papers coming out from social psychology looking at how we all have these kind of negative biases about the people that we meet. And we don't need to. They're like inhibiting, they're self-sabotaging. We're a lot more pessimistic than we should be. And so that's, essentially the message of the laws of connection. But my favorite example of this is something called the liking gap. And that's my third mindset message, which is essentially that we are more loved than we think, and more liked than we think. And so when you meet someone new for the first time, for example, and you kind of have a really good conversation, when you go away from that, you're likely to believe that you liked the other person more than they liked you. But the truth is, the other person is feeling exactly the same way. Like, we're all doing this. We're all underestimating how much the other person liked us. And it's because we become fixated on really like these minor details that don't really matter. Like you become sure that you said this kind of faux pas, or you sounded clumsy, or you were boring. But the other person probably isn't thinking those things at all. They're probably not remembering those, tiny little slip-ups. What they're remembering was how warm you were, how interesting, how interested you were in the other person. So that's the liking gap. And I think just by recognizing that one fact, actually, it can really smooth over a lot of our social anxieties and help us to make connection with more people that we meet in our lives.
It's amazing, because I was thinking about that when I received your message, that we always think, oh, I don't think they liked me. They never, the way they behaved, or what they said, or we tend to think, usually the worst is probably because the negativity creeps in there as well, making us think. But you know what, when David came in here, because I knew about the liking gap from his current book, I said, by the way, David, I like you. I like you already. I like you very much. So you don't have to worry about it. But I know you, as a researcher, as a science writer, you probably don't have to worry about it right now. It still probably creeps in as it does for you, but you probably understand that we all actually have nothing against each other, because people are nice. And there's nothing not to like about people, unless they're spitting, shouting or something, and you're like, oh, wow, that's a little bit rude or disrespectful. Otherwise, people are always nice and respectful.
Yeah, I mean, that is absolutely what comes out of the research, is that people are much nicer than we expect, that our interactions are much more pleasurable than we expect. And, I think like you were saying, like telling me that you liked me, like when you met me, actually, that's a really good strategy. So, when I meet people and I've enjoyed the conversation, which is almost always, I would tell them, like, I've really enjoyed this. Like, I liked meeting you. I was interested.
Nice.
And because I think otherwise, like if we don't make that explicit, people can go away with these kind of doubts and fears, and that is a barrier to connection. And so one of the other chapters on my book is all about complimenting people, and we just don't do that enough. We assume that they know how great they are, but they probably don't. And so that's what I think, just kind of making it clear how we feel can be so powerful.
Thank you, David. As you can see, I'm already
excited.
trying to serve you. What I've been doing here whilst we talk, because I could not want to interrupt, I promise you, this was just amazing. So I made a little butter sauce, which was butter, cream, lemon juice, a bit salt, pepper, and dill. asparagus there, lightly grilled, and I'm going to serve you this salmon, which is actually looking quite all right. So I am happy how it turned out, David.
I think it's looking delicious.
Yeah, thank you. The expectation is
Totally.
there, and it's going to be met, most likely.
will.
I'm quite positive about
Yeah,
this.
no, I'm certain.
So I'm actually going to serve you like a proper chef, because I know I saw that in the video. So, salmon, and this sauce. Just going to put here, and a bit here. And then we're going to put some asparagus, which is always nice. So it feels like you are in your element right now, David, because you're living, you're researching, and what else do you do with these discoveries in your life?
So, I mean, I write a lot for the kind of Guardian and the BBC about these discoveries, but yeah, I, applied them all, whether it's, I'm kind of trying to learn Spanish at the moment, so I apply like the science of memory to that. When I'm working out at the gym, I apply like some of the studies I've spoken about. Yeah, it's like, for me, I think I'm in an incredibly privileged position that I can basically, my hobby, understanding the human mind, has become my profession.
Wow, absolutely fascinating. So, David, it's such a joy and pleasure to serve you.
Wow.
Salmon, encased with almost like a potato hash brown, you would say. I don't even know what I'm naming it as I'm going. Encased with the potato hash brown, with asparagus, creamy white wine sauce, and with a bit of fish roe, or you could say kind of salmon caviar. So hopefully you enjoy that.
Thank you. I mean, I've never had an interview that has ended so well with such a delicious meal. So thank you so much.
No, thank you so much for being here and for sharing all your experiences, and for really, I'm thinking you are bringing this light that we all need. You are part of this evolution, part of us understanding who we are as humans. I think you serve that part in the world.
Thank you. I really do think it's becoming part of the zeitgeist now, that people are becoming more and more aware of how important their psychology is to the way they live their life. Yeah.
And David, when is your new book coming out?
That's coming out on the 6th of June.
6th of June.
Yeah.
I hope people, you go for it, go get the book. I'm not saying that because you're here. I'm saying that would really enhance your life. And also speaking about the expectation effect, about the longevity and the positive mind. And David has done a lot of extensive research. And a lot of people have a way of taking things in, either scientific or belief.
Yeah.
I am either of those. Go for it. Go for it. Go. Give a go. Give a try.
I can wait. It's absolutely delicious.
Please.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
It's exceeded my expectations.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much, David. And I think the scientific gives us evidence, gives us proof. And your evidence and your research has, I think, contributed greatly to our next living of, another 50, 100 years, because I want humans to realize the power of our mind, the power of our thoughts, and all of that shape really how we live our lives and how long we live our lives. So I'm so grateful you doing this, and thank you so much for being such an amazing person and being so interested in that and helping others.
Well, thank you so much for spreading the message. I really appreciate it.
Please dig in now. Thank you everyone so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, because I had a blast. I could go on and go on with David, but I will leave David to enjoy his delicious meal, and I will join you as well. I have some more ingredients, so I will prepare for myself as well, really quick, so I can join you for this delightful meal. Thank you so much, everyone. I will include all details from David's books and your website and LinkedIn, any other connections that you would like to reach out to David. And I'm sure you would be welcoming any thoughts or experience. And actually, you're doing a lot of research, and there is a lot of people's experience you take in your books.
Yeah,
real
absolutely.
life experience.
Yeah, lots of and some historical examples from like Helen Keller to Benjamin Franklin. But yeah, I'd really love to hear people's comments on how they apply the laws of connection or the expectation effect in their life.
Thank you so much. Helen Keller was one of my first books that I read, and I was fascinated by that girl. And you mentioned in the book straight away.
Yeah, very inspiring. Yeah.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and have a good day.
Thank you.